Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to be talking all about former one world champion, two weight world champion, I should say, Reinier de Ridder's UFC debut. Now, I know that I'm pronouncing that absolutely terribly, so I do apologize to anyone who is offended by my pronunciation. We'll stick to calling him RDR if we can from here on out. This video took a little bit longer to get out than I originally intended. I said on this past weekend's episode of the, this past Monday's episode of the One Report, I was going to cover RDR's debut that happened last weekend at the UFC Apex, UFC Vegas 100. But it has been a crazy week over here, so I haven't had time to get it out. Hence why we're going to do it now. And I'm also going to be recording a couple other videos in a row here. So we're keeping coming at you, thick and fast. So I apologize if the lighting and everything looks a little bit different to how it usually does. This is the only time I had to fit in these recordings, and so we're going to try and get a couple of videos done. Then they will come out over the next few days, so make sure you're subscribed and all that good stuff. So if you didn't know, I'm sure you did. Reinier de Ridder, I said I wasn't going to say it, and I said it already. The former one middleweight and light heavyweight world champion made his UFC debut this weekend. He took on Gerald Meerschaert. The fight ended up being the co-main event because the original co-main event between Miles Johnson and Cody Garbrandt fell through, I believe, like the day before the fight or something. I can't actually remember now, even though I did a report on it. So I was extremely excited to watch RDR's UFC debut. RDR is one of my favorite fighters to watch because he is a true specialist, and quite a rare. You get a lot of obviously wrestling specialists, a lot of striking specialists, not so many jiu-jitsu specialists, and that is exactly what RDR is. His jiu-jitsu game is also very unique. It's very creative, very submission heavy. A lot of MMA coaches will teach you position before submission. RDR goes for the submissions, and in my opinion, that makes him fun to watch. It might not be for everybody, because like I said, the rest of his game, whilst not bad by any means, is definitely not as good as his submission skills. I am a big fan of RDR, the Dutch Knight, and I was very excited, like I said, to watch him make his UFC debut. So how did it go, his UFC debut against Gerald Meerschaert? Well, I'll pull up his profile here on UFC Stats. I'm kind of blocking a few here. I don't know if it's better if I move over that way. I mean, as you can see, 12 wins out of 18 by submission, 4 by knockout, which I would imagine most of those are ground and pound. But saying that, the first round against Gerald, I thought, was not going amazingly. It was very clear that Gerald Meerschaert was not going to engage in the grappling if he didn't need to, and felt like he had the better striking. And whilst I felt like Gerald's striking technique was better, RDR has a kind of weird thing that has always kind of, his style is very awkward, and it's almost like when he closes the gap and gets close to opponents, he's waiting to see what they'll do and whether they'll hang around with him and clinch with him so that he can try and take them down and get a submission. And so you kind of get these periods where he's quite slow to exit, and also doesn't really exit in the way that you would expect him to. A lot of time he kind of stands and angles away and stuff. It's just a very awkward striking style, which surprises me considering obviously he is Dutch, trains with a lot of Dutch kickboxers. I would think that he would be very regimented in his striking, but instead he still has this very unique style to him. And in the end, he ends up, I imagine, winning. I should have checked the scorecards, but I imagine winning the first round right at the end of the first round because he dropped Gerald with a huge shot. And that kind of was the difference between them on the feet, whilst Gerald was, like I said, I think technically better, more accurate, setting things up a little bit better. RDR, first of all, like is just looked huge at middleweight. Obviously, he fought a middleweight in one and light heavyweight, but their weight classes work a little bit differently. So this is the first time he's fought at 185 pounds since before he was with one, and he just looked huge. And yeah, he obviously had the power advantage when he could land it. From my memory, this was a week ago. Like I said, I wanted to get this video out like Tuesday or something, but it just didn't happen. Gerald did a better job in the second round. And then, you're thinking it comes down to this. And whilst I thought RDR had some moments that were encouraging, I thought he looked tired going into the third round, and that made me a little bit worried. But he was able to get a takedown, and from there, he was able to get the arm triangle submission to get the finish over Gerald Meerschaert, who I believe has the most. Does he have the most submissions in UFC history? Charles Oliveira has the most finishes. I think Gerald has the most submissions, if I'm not mistaken. He has a lot. I realized I'm showing you the UFC stats without actually showing you the UFC stats. So yeah, you can see his striking stats there and stuff. They might be a little bit small, so I apologize, but you can go check this out for yourself on UFC.com if you would like to. Yeah, I thought the performance was all right. I didn't think it was amazing, and I think that for people watching RDR for the first time, a lot of them. And I think I saw a few tweets about this and stuff, and I don't particularly agree with things like this. I think it's a little bit over the top, but I saw people being like, wait, this guy was a two-weight world champion in one. And, you know, he's being outstruck by Gerald Meerschaert, who Gerald's grappling is very good. So I always felt like that might be an issue for RDR in terms of getting the fight to the floor. But I will say his takedowns surprised me. I thought his takedowns looked very, very good. What's the takedown stat for him here? There you go. Takedown accuracy. Takedowns landed, they don't have a stat for, but takedowns attempted is 13. So you can work out the percentage by yourself, I guess, to work out how many he actually landed. Takedown average per 15 minutes, 6.39. And there was a few attempts that Gerald was able to defend, but I think for the most part, he was pretty successful with them. We should speak a little bit about what he said in his post-fight interviews and you know the press conference and things like that. I will pull up an article here from MMA Fighting, where the headline is Reinier de Ridder warns fighters not to sign with one championship. I said it again. Interested in Khamzat Chimaev, which I think is a little bit getting ahead of ourselves, but you know, I'm sure I don't know what the context of the question he was asked and things like that. So, you know, I'm not saying he's calling out Chimaev, but expressing interest in it, you know, there's absolutely no problem with that. Am I in the way? I'm in the way regardless. So I do apologize. So he spoke a little bit about one. He hasn't spoken too much about it. His departure, if you don't know, from one was quite strange. He announced that he was going to be competing on UAE Warriors, and the response from one was that he was still under contract with them. And then he fought on UAE Warriors and then signed with the UFC, and there was no real official statement or anything like that. It was all a bit strange. So he said, "This is something I feel I have to do for other fighters. If you're thinking of signing with one championship, don't. It's that simple. You should not. There's nothing there. There's no fights. You're just wrong if you do this. If you sign there, this is a bad mistake." Now, he is talking about RDR struggled with not being kept active during his final years with one championship. He has spoken, you know, pretty positively of one up until the last few years where he wasn't able to get fights. Part of that being that one's heavier weight classes, specifically middleweight and light heavyweight, are just not very populated at all, especially light heavyweight. As you can see with Anatoly Malakin and his title wins and things like that. And also just a problem with one as a whole over the last few years in that the MMA rosters and divisions have not been kept very active as a whole. You know, there's the whole, if you subscribe to my channel or you stay up to date with One News, you'll know all this already, but the whole karate combat thing, several fighters coming out and speaking and saying the same thing, the likes of Gary Tonin, the likes of Marcus Puchecha Almeida, who I believe has fought out of his one contract, so he could be on his way over to the UFC or somewhere similar. It's been a bad couple of years. De Ridder said, the stress I've been put through, the stress my family's been put through to even just get fights, it hasn't been nice. It's hard for me to talk bad because I had a couple of good years at one as well. In the beginning, they treated me well. Over the past couple of years, it's been really bad. Yeah, I don't think this is particularly anything new. I think that I probably could have guessed this about RDR. I spoke to RDR earlier this year for a piece that I wrote for Fighters Only, and you know, he wasn't explicitly saying I want to leave one championship or anything like that, but he was like, it's been frustrating not getting fights, and that's perfectly understandable. I don't know what's going on with him and one and whether that is come to an end, but I would imagine by the fact he's made his UFC debut that it has. But we will see. In terms of what's next for RDR, I don't think it should be Chimaev. Let's pull up the rankings here, and we'll pick out a matchup, because I do think that after that submission win over Gerald Meerschaert, he could probably take on a top 15 middleweight, if not a top 15 middleweight, somewhere around that mark. In fact, let's pull up a more in-depth ranking, which is the what am I looking for? Is it the Fight Matrix ones that we usually go to? Yes. All right, let's pull up the Fight Matrix rankings instead. That might be a little bit more useful. Apologies about this. There you go. Okay. The reason because I think top 15 maybe by the time we look at the top 15 we might go maybe not. I think all of these names are out of the question for now, personally, unless maybe there's an opportunity for a late notice fight or something like that. Obviously, that this is general MMA rankings, not just the UFC. So you do have Johnny Evelyn there in the number 6 spot and things like that. Is Roma Delidze actually ranked that high in the UFC one? Let me just check. Yeah, I guess. Where is he ranked? Number 10. Yeah, okay. Fabian Edwards also in this list. So if we look around this spot, I don't think it should be somebody like Anthony Hernandez, although that is definitely a fight that I would be interested in seeing in the future. Kevin Holland off of a loss, I don't think. I mean, if I was RDR, I would not be against that matchup at all. Although I guess Kevin Holland could pose him some threats for sure, but Kevin Holland does tend to struggle against grapplers, even if his submission game is pretty good. Chris Curtis is not a bad shout at all. Did Chris Curtis recently have a fight cancelled? I'm sure he did. I'm not too sure. Sharo Magomedov, it looks like he's going to be fighting Michael Venom Page next. Joe Pyfer would be an interesting one because that kind of feels like a... Would the UFC want Joe Pyfer to lose 2 in a row? Obviously, they're not, they're not... He obviously lost. I say 2 in a row. He literally just beat Marc-Andre Barrio, but you know what I mean. He lost to Jack Hermansson, another grappler who is pretty submission focused. Although Jack didn't really do a lot of. I believe off the top of my head, he beat him striking mostly. That could be an interesting one. You can see RDR is actually in the number 25 spot there. Andre Muniz has been booked against Ikram Alaskarov. Paul Craig would be a really fun one, I think. Admittedly, you would be giving him another jiu-jitsu guy. He just fought Gerald Meerschaert, so putting him in there with Paul Craig would be like, do you just want Reinier de Ridder to fight all the other jiu-jitsu guys? But as a fan, I think that even, obviously Paul Craig at the time recording this is fighting tomorrow. He's fighting Bo Nickel. You could have RDR go up and fight someone around, like I said, that top 15 range. And if he loses, I think you could, if Paul Craig loses to Bo Nickel and Reinier de Ridder beats or loses to whoever he fights next, I think you could do RDR versus Paul Craig off the back of that. Can you imagine if we got that at UFC London next year? Oh, I would absolutely adore that. But that would be a fun one. I would want to see that for sure. Let me know in the comments below, what did you think of RDR's debut? How do you see him doing at middleweight in the UFC? Do you think that he did enough to earn a top 15 ranked opponent? And yeah, give me some opponent predictions. Who do you want to see him in there with? I definitely do want to see the Paul Craig matchup before all is said and done. But yeah, like I said, I don't think that necessarily needs to be next. So we could probably wait for that. Could we do Bo Nickel, Reinier de Ridder? Maybe. I mean, I think Bo Nickel will probably be looking at top 15 opponents if he gets past Paul Craig this weekend, but we will wait and see and find out. Thank you for checking out this video. I'm sure I will catch you all very, very soon, but until then, peace.